In the modern period, war music or martial music plays an important role in the military traditions around the world. And because of this, one question which can be asked is whether in the ancient period war music also played an important role in ancient military traditions or not. So in this video we will try to answer this question. Now before talking about war music, I think it is better to talk about the precursor to war music, which was the war cry. And we find that the earliest reference of war cry comes from the Vedic literature. And here we are told that Indra was famous for his war cry. And then we are told that the Vedic warriors, Maruts, were born uttering a battle cry. So this is how the war cry has been mentioned in the Vedic literature. Now when we talk about war music, we find that whether we are talking about Vedic literature or whether we are talking about literature that were composed in later centuries, war music plays an important role in the description of battles. The importance of war music can be seen from Mahabharata, where we are provided with different reference on when war music was used. So we are told that war music was used when the army marched. It was also used when a battle began. War music was also used to announce the fall of a great warrior. Some references tells us that the war music was used for signaling purposes as well. And most importantly, war music was used to encourage warriors to put up a great fight. Now, how loud this war music could be can be seen from a 12th century Sanskrit text called Manasollas. This text was written by a Chalukya king, Someshwar III. And here, Someshwar III tells us how loud a war music should be, particularly before the battle. So he recommends that it should be so loud that the sky itself tears. So this is the level, according to Someshwar, the loudness should be. Now the musical instruments that were used to produce this war music were collectively called Vadtrani. And we find that there were multiple instruments. And I will in this video discuss three important instruments. These were war drums, trumpets and conch shells. So let's start with war drums, or sometimes they are also called dundubhi. Now we see that Dundubi or war drums has been first mentioned in Rig Veda, and there is a great praise about the qualities of war drums that is described in the Rig Veda. But apart from the Rig Veda, we see that in Atharvaveda, Dundubi or war drum has also been praised, and here it is referred as thundering like a lion. Now we also see that apart from the Vedic literature, it is also mentioned in Agni Puran. And according to me, this is the best description or praise of war drum that we see in the entire ancient Indian literature. So the passage of Agni Puran goes like this. O war drum, you cause the hearts of the enemies to tremble by your sound. You beat in such a way that you may achieve victory for the king's army. Just as the rumbling clouds cause fright in women, so also let our enemies get frightened by your sound in the battle. Apart from Agni Puran, we find that in Greek accounts that talks about Alexander's invasion, the use of war drums by the Indians has been mentioned. So here the Greek writers tells us that when Porus marched his army to meet Alexander, the army was accompanied by drummers, and these drummers were positioned alongside the archers and the infantry. Another interesting detail that comes from these Greek writers is that they were surprised to find that the elephants were not much disturbed by the sound of these war drums and also the sound of the battle. Now this makes sense because these war elephants were trained for this situation. In Ashokan edicts also we find that war drums are mentioned, and here the term which is used for war drums is bheri. And in the Rock Edict we have this reference that Ashok has now replaced Bheri Ghosh, which means sound of the war drums, with Dhamma Ghosh, which means sound of Dhamma. So here in this reference, we see how war drums are mentioned by Ashok. Another way of how war drums were used comes from Rajdhani. So here we are told that during a night watch, particularly when soldiers were protecting a camp or a fort, the war drums were beaten regularly. And we are also told that when a surprise attack happened, the war drum and trumpets were used to announce this attack. So these are some of the reference about war drums. Now let's talk about trumpets or turahi. Now what we see is that when we talk about trumpets, there is a debate. Some scholars believe that trumpets were introduced by the Greeks. This is because we see that in Vedic literature there is no mention of trumpets. In Mahabharata, trumpets are mentioned, but these scholars argue that these references are later interpolation. What we also see is that in Arthashastra, trumpets are mentioned, and here Kautilya tells us that it should be used for signaling purpose. So the term in Kautilya which is used is Turya Ghosh, or the sound of trumpet, which should be used for signaling. Now the question whether it was introduced by the Greeks, in my view, has not been resolved yet. It is still a matter of debate. Now let's move to the third important musical instrument that was used for war music, which was conch shells or shankh. Now we all know about the importance of shankh and how many times it is referred in the Mahabharata. So I'm not going to go much into the detail of shankh. So these are some of the important instruments that were used to produce the war music. Now what we also see is that there was a way of how they were used during the battle. So we are told that before the battle, these musical instruments were first washed and then fragrance were applied to them. And we are told that after applying the fragrance, these musical instruments were then handed over to the musician by the Purohit. Now during this process, Purohits were also chanting the mantras. So this was the process of how before the battle these musical instruments were prepared. So this is some of the important reference concerning war music that appears in ancient Indian literature. Now if you want to know about the reference of flags that comes in ancient Indian literature, please watch this video. Thank you for watching.